Welcome back. Hope your weekend was interesting. Um, we're winding down towards Christmas break here, winter break. Do you have big plans for Christmas? Hope you stay safe. Gather in small groups, folks. We're far from over with this ridiculous thing. Anyway, you're probably sick of hearing it, as I am sick of talking about it. Here we are, December, countdown to the end of class. See, today's the 7th, and class ends less than 2 weeks. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 more lectures. That'll be it, folks. 17th will be our last day. This weekend, I'll open up the so you can hand in the journal. And after I open it up, you can hand it in anytime. But keep writing in it until I open that up. We still have a few more things I need to cover, like half the film in the history of our nation, the world. It's hard to cover everything. It's not impossible, but we give it our best shot. And so we've come out of the last thing we kind of talked about was the last golden age, what they call the last golden era of Hollywood. You saw the documentary, you had your quiz on, which I'm not done grading yet. Auteur director kind of took over the studios, and the movies made money. And when movies make money, Hollywood perks up. But what was making money towards the end of that era, what killed off the auteur directors era, not just drug use, because all of them didn't take drugs. Spielberg has never smoked a joint. George Lucas also. And those are the guys that were leading the new charge for the new sort of cinema that we're still living with today. Meaning the blockbuster summer, hugely budgeted film like Jaws, and then Star Wars sealed the deal on that one. And since then, we've had Jaws 1, 2, 3. Each one getting progressively worse. I think the last one, Jaws in 3D. Oh yeah, who's watched that one? But when you watch it, it's like I'm rooting for the shark, because it's a bunch of rich kids on a boat partying like there's no tomorrow. And I'm going, oh, please, where's the shark when we need them? Take these people down. It was kind of sad by then. Even Roy Scheider quit by then. I think Dennis Quaid was the sheriff in this one. Anyway, he must have needed the job. And I guess it works being a great, then, most jobs, being a Hollywood actor is not a bad gig to get if you could manage it. The other film that kind of sealed the fate of Hollywood, the new Hollywood, would be Star Wars. Obviously, it covered it in that video we watched that your test was based on, and that was just Star Wars. The first one was a phenomenon. They thought Jaws was the first movie to ever make $100 million, and that was the story. And all of a sudden, it wasn't about the content of the films or the performances or the script or the direction. It was about, well, how much money did the movie make? That became the headline. If your movie made like Jaws, $100 million, which was a big deal in those days. Now it's not such a big deal. That became the story. And that must mean you must have it out of the park and made way over $100 million. It's still making money. And like in the documentary mentioned, George Lucas made a fortune on toys, folks. All of a sudden, movies were about selling toys and product. And how many of you have those toys? Who out there has a lightsaber? Come on, you can admit it. Who out there has Star Wars pajamas? Yes, you do. Don't sell them. Keep them. Put them in a plastic bag. They're going to be worth something one day. I hope you're still not wearing them. That could be kind of creepy. Anyway, Star Wars sheets. The kids ate up Star Wars. They made everything into an action doll that never had happened before. And George Lucas made, yes, he made a fortune on the box office return on Star Wars, but he also made a fortune on the toys and all the games and everything else that came with it. That's something we hadn't had before. Hollywood liked it. They liked it a lot. And this is the studios now because they didn't like putting up with those artistic types who were going to tell them that The Godfather was going to be a great movie. They wanted to take the power back, and you don't tell them, they tell you. And that's essentially where we are to this day. Most movies are hired, processed by the collective. They hire collectively. Now, instead of having one screenwriter that writes all the parts and the action and the dialogue and everything else, they piecemeal it out. If you're good at writing action parts, that's what you're hired to do. If you're good at writing female dialogue, that's what they hire you to do. If you're good at macho male dialogue, that's what you're hired to do. It's rare nowadays that you ever see a single credit for one person writing a screenplay. That's why movies all sort of look and talk and walk the same, because it's all done by this giant collective. They do not want to take a chance. They don't want to have the auteur voice in there at all. And so you won't get a movie that was made by Martin Scorsese or Robert Altman or Hal Ashby that's going to have the auteur voice, which is the director's voice or, the filmmaker's voice. Because they're not writing these things, they are directing them, but they're directing them. It's different nowadays. They have audience previews, a lot of them. And so if people in the preview, when they show you parts of your film, if they don't understand it, if they're not happy with it, you have to go out and film more. If you look at most Hollywood films now, they all have a kind of a positive ending because they're setting it up for a sequel, folks. They're only going to kill the bad guys. They're not going to kill too many good guys because they want them to come back. And they want it to have kind of like a positive outcome. If it's too dark, it won't fly. Now, there's some obviously there's that dark films are getting through, but mostly now they're going down to HBO and Netflix, and they're streaming on those streaming platforms. They're not necessarily making money in the theater for the studios. The studios want a for sure thing. They want everybody to be happy. And that means the audience has to be happy. The managers of the theater have to be happy because the audiences are coming in. And the people who are selling the Coke and the soft drinks and the popcorn and all the other eats, they have to be happy because people have got to be buying all that expensive stuff or nobody stays in business. I talked about this the other day. Things have changed now in Hollywood because of the pandemic. A lot of movie theaters, for the most part, they're only functioning at 25%. They're not selling half what they used to sell. So it's a new deal out there, and who knows when it's going to change. Probably not for another year, maybe. Once the vaccine, if there is a real one that actually works, it comes out, and then people will inch their way back into restaurants and movie theaters and bars, and we'll get back to the way we used to be, possibly. But we've all been kind of mauled over this pandemic. Hollywood is no different than the rest of us. They need to have people, they need to have product, and they need to have people paying for that product. So but I'm getting into pandemic times now. We're coming into the 80s now in Hollywood, and it's the decade of a lot of sequels. We had Star Wars sequels, right? 1, 2, 3. I don't know how many came out in the 80s. at least that. And then they started doing prequels, right? And now we're doing prequels of prequels and sequels from the prequels. It's hard to keep track exactly where we are. But all of a sudden, Obi-Wan Kenobi is being played by a younger actor, and Darth Vader is, I don't know where he stands. I stopped watching him years ago. The last one I saw when I lived in Portland, oh, what was it? It was pretty, sorry, folks. I was pretty bored through the whole thing. Natalie Portman was in it. Does that make sense? This would be 2004 or something like that. Anyway, I thought, oh, this is getting silly now. It's ridiculous. Who could keep track of it? Who cares? But obviously people do because they keep making money. As long as they keep money, then they have spin-offs of those things. And they have the real Star Wars franchise. Then there's the kind of outlying Star Wars franchise. It's really not a Star Wars franchise. It's something else, but it's got a lot of Star Wars characters. You know what I'm talking about. Then there's the animations. It goes endless. Thank you, George Lucas, for creating this very confusing universe that's made literally so much money we can't even count it. And that all started with the original Star Wars. So now we got films that are coming out in the 80s, and they're trying to match this sort of sequel thing, this sort of popcorn movie. They call them, essentially they're B movies with big budgets. They're simple melodramas are good against evil. Say for example, Top Gun. I know you love it. Tom Cruise at his most macho. He's up there flying jets. He's intimidating Russian flyers. He has a hot girlfriend. He drives a hot motorcycle. He's Mr. Hot Shot. They just made a sequel, by the way. It's just made recently. I don't know if it's ever come out. Has it? Has anybody seen it? It was supposed to come out. And it's a little ridiculous, folks. No offense, but it is. Tom Cruise is pushing 60 now. Normally, he wouldn't be a Top Gun pilot anymore because it's a young man's game. He'd be retired probably, but he's up there still with up there with the best of those young people because Tom Cruise is never going to admit how old he really is. If anybody just saw the newest Mission Impossible, sorry, folks, he was getting pretty slow. I'm not buying it. They have younger actors in it who do a lot of the action around him. That's always the for sure thing, that the older actor and like guys like Tom Cruise or Liam Neeson, the action actors, are getting a little long in the tooth and they need help. Plus, they want to get a younger audience because a lot of young people don't really care about Tom Cruise. They want to see the young people, so they give them opportunity in the Tom Cruise sequels. Top Gun's the same way. Then we have, and Top Gun's just an adrenaline rush. Absolutely, it's adrenaline, but it's not much else there. It's for your adrenaline pleasure. Another one that was popular in those days was Goonies, Gremlins, all these kind of little creatures taking over things. Very entertaining, very user friendly, and they're going to make a lot of money. But it was for serious filmmakers, for serious cinephiles. It was kind of a dead era, a dead time, a dead decade of sequels and Superman sequels. The first one, folks, with the Christopher Reeves, which the first one's totally entertaining. After that, it's tiresome. Here he comes along again, the same, but now there's another bad guy, and it's there to make a boatload of money. Are they well directed? Are they entertaining? Absolutely. If that's what you need and all you want, there you go. As a steady diet, it's pretty low. It's pretty high in fat content and sugar content. You're not going to get real healthy if that's all your diet is. It's like, don't eat at McDonald's every day. Just do it every other day. And that's what it is. It's fast food. It's comforting to see sequels. That's what it totally is. When I used to have a class in person, I'd take a poll. Do you look forward to a sequel, whatever it is, John Wick sequel, let's say? I've seen all the John Wick. They're totally entertaining. Way too much violence from my take, because it's violence like a cartoon violence. There's no end result, no mourning. Nobody's crying over all the dead bodies. There's just a lot of dead bodies, and he kills people in a very cool way. Um, there's nothing cool about killing somebody, folks. But we've made it cool, that's for sure. Um, and I asked the students, I go, well, why? What is it about the sequel? Well, because it's familiar. They they essentially crave to see the same thing, and because so often the sequels are almost the exact same as the first film. A little variation, there's a new bad guy, new love interest. There's not any more stakes aren't risen because you know the hero's going to live because he has to, or there's not going to be another sequel. So we know that's not going to happen. Um, and if he dies, it's all fake. He only dies virtually. He comes back some other way, some magical way. These films are fantasy films and fairy tales, pure and simple. Um, so if you're looking for something more meaty, something for more meaningful, you had to turn to the beginnings of independent filmmaking. Um, Really, and the independent filmmaking been going along for a while. John Cassavetes sort of started it in the 60s, and other people followed suit, but it was mostly um, not an acceptable thing until the 80s. A couple of filmmakers, I'm going to talk about them, and I'm going to show, I'll post some YouTube videos so you can go watch some of their stuff. I hope you do. One of them would be Jim Jarmusch, who came out of independent filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, and a hipster from New York, still making films. He just made his last film, came out last year about maybe saw it. Bill Murray was in it, Adam Driver. They're small town sheriff fighting off zombies. Maybe saw it. I didn't like it. He was trying to glom onto the zombie trend, but he's done some amazing films, always worthwhile. His first film definitely falls in that category, Stranger in Paradise. He filmed on very little money, $60,000, $70,000. He got film stock from another filmmaker, Wim Wenders, who had some leftover film, and he made this little black and white gem of a film. Yes, folks, in black and white, because it's cheaper to film in black and white. And he used amateur actors, musicians. John Laurie was a jazz musician, and it's very what they call deadpan, meaning the humor and emotion is very dull, dead. But it's funny because of that. And it's about a road trip. These three people take a road trip to go visit somebody. That's all it is. It's not much of a story, but it's just amusing their little day-to-day rituals. And the music, of course, is always good. Jarmusch always has excellent choice in music. He's a musician also, has his own kind of techno band. So Stranger in Paradise, when I was living in LA, came out, I want to say 1982 or thereabout. It actually played in Century City Mall at a mall theater, which is shocking because here we have this little independent film filmed in black and white. You wouldn't think you'd see it at the mall. And so I had to go down there to see it. And I was like, wow, it's in this little nothing of a film is in the mall. But I came out of there thinking, wow, there might be a change in the air. If this film gets to play here, what else is possible? It was a door opening into a possible hopeful future for tour filmmakers. Another film that sneaked in under the wire was called The Return of the Secaucus Seven by John Sayles, who was essentially made his money off of writing scripts and for Hollywood. He had written a couple exploitation films. Some of them were pretty good. These are low budget B movies usually. He did one called Piranha, I think, about piranhas eating people. That's always fun. Um, so, and he put his money where his mouth is, and he made this film for low six figures. It was, if you know the movie The Big Chill that came out in the 80s about the class reunion of these hipsters who get together for a reunion. This was sort of the first one of those. It was about these students are having a reunion and getting together and and they had been radical college students, politically radical, I should say, and it's kind of where we pick up with them 10 years later to see where they are. And it's raw and emotional, filmed once again in black and white because that's cheaper to film that way. And it was starting to play in regular theaters, not just art theaters, not just at the college campuses. So interesting things were starting to happen. Another filmmaker was coming out at this a little earlier, but he was right in there. David Lynch, maybe you know who that is. He had a successful series called Twin Peaks. He's also did Wild at Heart, um, and many other films. Lost Highway. He has a very dark vision of America, about life in general. And he had done a film in the 70s called Eraserhead. I should make you agree. And he got his friends together and they filmed over a 2 or 3 year period into one of the most original films ever probably made. He got hired into Hollywood after that, and he did one or two kind of Hollywood films. He did Dune, which was a disaster. He should not have done Dune. That's a great sci-fi movie. Maybe you know the book, but his version of it, it's not too good. All filmed on Hollywood sets. Hey, Sting is in it, folks. Don't you love Sting from Police? Um, it was sort of a disaster. He was the wrong guy. Dune was a film that should have been made by Alejandro Jodorowsky, who was a wonderful surrealistic filmmaker who was going to make the film. He didn't have the commercial viability for them to give him the rights, and so it failed. But he had an artistic, there's a great documentary on, it's called Jodorowsky's Dune. You should check it out. What he would have done to that book would have been fantastic. Um, but David Lynch was not the right guy for that. But he had done another movie called Elephant Man, which was based on a play. Really well done movie in black and white, folks, by the way. Um, Mel Brooks, of all people, the funny man, Mel Brooks, from the producers, etc., had the rights to it. It was the producer, and he thought David Lynch was the man. And David Lynch does a really good job. John Hurt played the Elephant Man, and about a guy who has a horrible deformity in real life. It really happened, actually, in Victorian England. And how did he survive? Well, he eventually dies, of course, of his ailment. But the movie was heartfelt and visually stimulating, and so, but it wasn't generated from his own auteur outlook, and so he did a couple movies in the 80s. One was called Wild at Heart. Maybe you've seen it. And then one was called Blue Velvet. A dark vision of criminal-minded America. With stars Dennis Hopper and a bunch of other people. Once again, it's dark. When I say dark, I'm saying it's not a happy film, but it's also got lots of deadpan humor, which I appreciate. And so now these films are pretty commercial, and they're getting well recognized. So there's some hope out there between the sequels of Star Wars and Top Gun and Goonies and the whole bit. Another filmmaker who came out around that time, 87 or so, was Spike Lee. Spike Lee came out of the New York scene, Brooklyn, and his first movie, She's Gotta Have It, maybe you've seen it, changed everything for a black auteur filmmaker coming out. He was one of the few. There was other ones. Charles Burnett was coming out with his films during the 80s, so there was some hope that African Americans might have a shot at independent filmmaking. And Spike Lee definitely led the way. He's definitely had a wonderful career. He teaches, by the way, filmmaking in New York, NYU, other places in New York. He also is a commercial filmmaker. Maybe you've seen some of his movies, from Malcolm X to I'm drawing a blank. Son of Sam is one of my favorite movies about the summer of Sam, it was called. That's when the guy who was the serial killer was shooting people randomly on the streets in New York in the 70s. He made a wonderful film about that depressing subject. Um, and right now he does, well, he just did a documentary on the David Byrne play Utopia. So he keeps his hand in, very much so. He mostly, and he does Nike commercials too, folks. But these first two movies he did that came out in the 80s changed everything. They were a new template that there was something going on besides endless sequels coming out of Hollywood. These films were financed outside of Hollywood and they made money, and critics perked up. And when that happens, Hollywood does listen, or at least they try to look at it. If they could get out of their own way without thinking, is everybody going to like it? Is it going to have a happy ending? Can we set it up for a sequel? That sort of attitude. So here's 4 filmmakers that in the 80s. So there's the hope, folks. There's still some auteur filmmakers out there are struggling to put their films out there. And then along in the late 80s, there was a film festival called the United States Film Festival, a great title. And the actor Robert Redford took it over, and changed the title to Drumbeat Sundance Film Festival. And I'm going to leave it at that because my next lecture, I want to talk about how the Sundance Film Festival, along with Telluride and Toronto and Cannes Film Festival, has changed the landscape of filmmaking for the next 20 years. That's the next lecture, folks. We're going to stop at Sundance. So go listen to this lecture. Start working on your term papers, your last paper. I posted all those subjects. Pick a one, do a research paper. Also, make sure you keep your journals up to date. You'll be able to hand them in next week. And the last thing you need to do is watch this lecture and watch some of the film clips I'm going to ask you to watch. I'll post it all on Canvas today. That's it. Stay safe. It's still no rain or moisture in sight. It's going to be a dry Christmas, I think, but it was quite a beautiful day today. And with that note, hope you guys are watching movies. Hope you got something out of this class. And we'll continue on the next day, the next go around. And remember, folks, everything is cinema. It really bothers